Episode 4 ended with emancipation proclaimed, and winter's stalemate from Fredericksburg to Stones River. Episode 5 carries 1863's shock, Lee's boldest flank attack, Gettysburg's 3 days, Grant's capture of Vicksburg, and northern streets convulsed by draft riots while the world watched. Joseph Hooker restored furloughs, tightened discipline, and improved supply. Morale climbed after Fredericksburg's wound. He outnumbered Lee on paper, yet faced a foe who treated risk as currency. Spring mud dried into roads that would lead both armies toward a crossroads town in Pennsylvania. In late April, Hooker's host crossed the Rappahannock and pushed into the wilderness, a tangle of second-growth scrub where lines of sight died and maps lied. A brick mansion called Chancellorsville became headquarters and symbol. Lee, outnumbered, prepared to gamble again. On May 2nd, Stonewall Jackson's corps swung miles along hidden roads and burst from the woods onto the Union right. Surprise turned to panic. Blue divisions folded. The afternoon became a master class in Audacity and a warning that overconfidence kills. Night fighting in thickets turned battle into rumor. Commands collided. Friendly fire wounded Jackson as he returned from reconnaissance, a Confederate icon felled by his own pickets. Lee lost his aggressive left hand. The Army lost a legend while victory still shimmered. With Jackson down, J. Lee B. Stewart stepped up. Assaults hammered Hooker's line. Hooker himself suffered a concussion from a shell-burst column at Chancellorsville. Some said courage left with consciousness. Others blamed fate. The Union host withdrew north of the Rappahannock, bloodied and bitter. Chancellorsville entered Confederate memory as perfection, yet casualties bit deep. Lee had divided his army twice in enemy country and won. Such miracles tempt commanders toward the next long odds. Plans for another northern invasion began to harden while graves multiplied. In late June, Confederate columns searched for shoes and supplies. Union cavalry under John Buford recognized high ground south of Gettysburg. What began as a skirmish swelled into a meeting engagement. July 1st drew both armies toward a ridge and a hill the world would remember. Confederate assaults drove Federals through streets. Civilians hid in cellars. Union lines finally anchored on Cemetery Hill with night's help. Lee arrived, studied ground, and weighed whether to push harder or wait, decisions that would echo at dawn. Longstreet's attacks rolled into rocky ground, where regiments traded yards at brutal cost. The wheatfield changed hands until soil seemed soaked beyond color. Little round-top slopes became a last line where officers improvised under fire. Union brigades bent, but did not break on the far left. Stories of bayonet charges and exhausted volleys entered regimental legend. Whether one colonel's textbook pivot saved, the battle matters less than the truth. Terrain plus stubborn infantry can trump elegance. After massive artillery preparation, roughly 12,000 Confederates stepped from woods and walked nearly a mile of open fields toward the Union center on Cemetery Ridge. Shells tore lanes, canister opened. A stone wall and copse of trees became a hinge of American memory. A few gray-clad men pierced the angle. Most fell or staggered back. Pickett's division, among others, bled its name into myth. Lee met survivors with responsibility on his face. Meade's army, mangled, still gripped the hills. Storms turned roads to soup. Wagons carried wounded toward the Potomac. Meade pursued cautiously. Lincoln ached for annihilation that rarely visits civil wars. Lee's army escaped to fight another day, Another year, another 100,000 stories. While Pennsylvania thundered, Ulysses S. Grant maneuvered against Vicksburg, the fortress city that locked the great river. Failures, landings, and marches through Louisiana Bayou country finally placed his army east of the city, between Pemberton and Relief. May assaults against Vicksburg's ridges failed at terrible cost. Grant settled into siege lines, trenches, mines, constant fire. Civilians dug caves into yellow clay. Hunger became a second army inside the walls. Pemberton surrendered on Independence Day. Poetry historians note, irony soldiers felt. The Union gained the Mississippi spine. Lincoln called the father of waters again, unvexed to the sea. Port Hudson soon followed. The Confederacy split east from west. News of Gettysburg and Vicksburg arrived in waves. Relief, grief, boasting, prayer. The war was not over. It had, however, changed tempo. European observers recalculated. Recruiters adjusted speeches. Enslaved people listened for army drums along ever-shifting fronts. The Enrollment Act fed resentment. July 13, 16 saw Manhattan streets in riot. Mobs attacked the draft office, African-American neighborhoods, and symbols of elite power. Federal troops fresh from Gettysburg faced citizens in a second kind of battle. Class, race, and politics ignited together. Peace Democrats denounced conscription and emancipation as tyranny. Editors traded indictments. Soldiers cursed civilians who cursed the war. Democracy under fire tests. Every line of a constitution meant for peace. The president drafted public letters, measured, sometimes sharp, prodding generals and public opinion alike. He wanted victories used, not admired. He needed autumn elections to believe the Union could endure the bill. Black soldiers proved valor under fire from South Carolina's sands. Fort Wagner's assault cost Colonel Robert Goodshaw and many of his men, yet shifted argument from whether black men could fight to how fast the nation would arm them fully. On the western border, William Quantrill's raiders sacked Lawrence, Kansas, civilian massacre as partisan war's logic. Guerrilla savagery ran parallel to uniformed battles. Not all killing wore brass buttons. Near a creek the Cherokee named River of Death, Braxton Bragg's Confederates shattered Rosecrans, Union Army. George Thomas's stand on Snodgrass Hill earned Rock of Chickamauga. The routed Federals fled into Chattanooga's defenses. A siege Grant would later break, opening the war's next act. Chickamauga was tactically Confederate gold, yet strategically clumsy. Bragg quarreled with subordinates, besieged Chattanooga half-heartedly, and let Union forces regroup on key heights. Victory, like defeat, demands follow-through. At the cemetery dedication, Lincoln spoke briefly, redefining the war as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty could endure. The speech's poetry outlived the day's longer orations. Memory became argument about what America owed its dead. Greenbacks, bonds, impressment, and runaway prices ate civilian wages north and south. Governments printed determination, markets printed fear. Modern war's ledger included mothers who could not buy salt. We traced Chancellorsville's wild flank, Gettysburg's 3 days, Vicksburg's surrender, draft riots, and Chickamauga's blood. The Union held the river. The Confederacy still breathed fire in Georgia and Virginia. Episode 6 will follow Grant east, Sherman toward Atlanta, and election year America deciding whether to finish the war. Next time we march with Grant in Virginia's wilderness, with Sherman through Georgia's red clay, and with voters in 1864 who would choose between continuation and compromise. If Gettysburg's words moved you, read them aloud, then read a soldier's letter from July 3rd. Meaning lives between poetry and mud, we will see you where trenches replace open charges. Reformist general faced gossip. Competence mattered more than bottles. Controversial advance reshaped second-day geometry. Musetry in trees sounded like endless hail. Gunners traded ranges until caissons screamed. Edward Porter, Alexander's fire coordination, entered legend. Envelopes carried love and fatalism. Old friendships crossed at the wall's stones. Generals voted caution. Lincoln later groaned. Cavalry pride met operational cost. Second-day timing arguments lasted decades. High command losses rippled through corps. Wounded leadership became Gettysburg's glue. Chancellorsville memory haunted July 1st. Conservation versus expenditure split generals. Stray bullets made one woman a symbol. Bread and fear shared the same dark. Surgeons' saws never cooled. Cars smelled of chloroform and iron. Alexander Gardner's team framed ridge lines. States argued over plots and pride. Clay homes shook under shells. Calm smoke masked relentless calculation. July 4th timing negotiated honor and hunger. Last Confederate stronghold on the river fell. Western politics tugged at concentration. Politician general faced professional sneers. Johnston's caution frustrated Richmond. Partnership hardened for future campaigns. Labor and courage blurred job titles. Spades and courage opened roads. Army need met human rights unevenly. Chance chose bodies, riots chose targets. Labor competition poisoned New York streets. City governance buckled under mobs. Regulars faced citizens in smoke. Governors balanced order and anger. Regional moods diverged violently. Some men chose exile over induction. Fraud followed every incentive. Volunteers met trains of limbs. Faith handed beside lemons. Tents named for a surgeon's legacy. Germ theory had not saved soldiers yet. Stoic lines hid shock. Death became a market after big battles. Schedules prioritized suffering. Editors demanded instant myth. Woodcuts simplified 3 days into icons. British prose mixed admiration and distance. Ironclads in law crossed the Atlantic. Monroe Doctrine's test ran parallel. Northern ports hosted foreign hulls. Hyperinflation ate paychecks. Southern women's protests echoed in 1863 prices. Works and raids targeted white crystals. River news traveled up tributaries. Trans-Mississippi linked to main story. Teenagers learned massacre as war. Revenge math had no bottom. Native soldiers fought for treaty futures. Irish-born general earned grudging respect. Transfer debates began after Gettysburg. Confederate Western Command rotted from within. Heights above Chattanooga waited. Grant's logistics cracked sieges. Autumn battles loomed beyond this episode. A father's grief lived beside proclamations. Loss in politics pressed private minds. Victory's shape appeared in arguments. Abolitionist oratory pushed faster justice. Words moved men to uniform. Raids freed hundreds. Courage defied easy rank. Massacre politics waited in 1864. Meade's cautious stabs foreshadowed overland mud. Men learned geography with blood. Next year's stakes hid in ordinary maps. Lincoln's renomination was not guaranteed. Old generals watched from New Jersey. Absentee ballots tested democracy at war. Memory industry began before wounds closed. Bullets became souvenirs, ethics blurred. Preservation arguments started early. River armor escorted supply. Underwater threat aged admirals. Nights shortened, patrols lengthened. Cape Fear runs fed the Confederacy. Harbor forts endured another year. Parrott rifles lobbed shells into city. Soldiers demanded equal wages. Symbols outlived assaults.